Welcome to Fringe Pop 321, the show that believes the world is stranger than we think, but thinking should not be strange. If you're into ancient aliens, chances are pretty good that you've seen this image. What you're looking at is a picture of the amazing carved lid of the sarcophagus of the great king Pakal, who ruled almost 70 years in the Mayan city of Palenque. The lid was discovered in 1952 in what is now known to archaeologists as the Temple of the Inscriptions. The real lid is 7 feet wide by 12 feet high and is 9 to 11 inches thick in different places. It's made from a single stone slab. But the sarcophagus lid isn't really known for its magnificent artistic carving. Instead, it's touted as proof positive of ancient alien visitation. You think I'm exaggerating? There's a reproduction of the lid to size on display at the UFO Museum in Roswell, New Mexico. Ancient alien believers would have us believe that the carving shows the king in a rocket ship, seated in flight, looking to the stars. Now, does this make any sense at all? Does this sarcophagus lid give us evidence that Pakal was an extraterrestrial who flew around in rockets? How would we even know? Well, you came to the right place. Eric von Daniken is primarily responsible for promoting the idea that Pakal's sarcophagus is proof of ancient alien visitation. In his book, Chariots of the Gods, von Daniken interprets the lid in some pretty bizarre ways, basically making up meanings for Maya glyphs that are utterly contrary to what they actually mean. His glyph meanings are, in other words, total nonsense. For example, he identifies glyphs as indicating a navigation system, a symbol for crossing the galaxy, and one for combustible fuel. Let's not try to think about the fact that intergalactic travel is impossible with an internal combustion engine. Maya linguists, of course, know that these glyphs have a certain meaning, and they know what that meaning is. None of them, in fact, convey the ideas that von Daniken argues for. Basically, it's Pakal's posture, though, that most people have found persuasive. It looks to many people, because essentially they're told to think this, that Pakal is positioned like an astronaut in a rocket ship. But in fact, the meaning of Pakal's sarcophagus lid itself is, in fact, well understood. The glyphs on the lid conform to many other Mayan artifacts with the same symbols, none of which can be interpreted as a spaceship or space flight. And what all this means is that you can either ignore everything the Mayans have told us and preserved in their texts, and the sarcophagus lid and the tomb had texts. You can ignore all of that, what they tell us about their beliefs, or you can go with ancient aliens researchers, what they read into the glyphs. I mentioned a moment ago that the meaning of Pakal's sarcophagus lid is well understood, and that it conforms to many other Mayan artifacts with the same symbols, none of which can be interpreted as a spaceship. Now, linguists who have spent a great deal of their lives in Mayan texts, and again, there are texts on the sarcophagus lid and the tomb, understand completely what the glyphs on the lid signify. The problem is, of course, most people don't spend their lives reading Mayan, and what the Mayans believed sounds pretty strange to our ears. Now, there are lots of details I could add to this episode, and you'll find resources for all those sorts of things, additional arguments, additional data, on the web page on our Fringe Pop 321 website that, of course, corresponds to this episode. But I'm going to summarize a few here. Let's start with King Pakal's body, as it was discovered when the sarcophagus was opened. In typical Maya imagery, the maize god wears a skirt and a plethora of jade ornaments. One of the richest displays of jade in Mayan archaeology was found in Pakal's tomb. Pakal's body was in fact adorned with all sorts of jade objects and jewelry, things like rings and earrings, bracelets, necklaces, that sort of thing. He was also dressed in a skirt, just like the maize god would be in Mayan art. Many of Pakal's jewelry items were carved into the shapes of flowers, plants, trees, and fruit, and his beaded bracelets were woven to look like maize cobs. Gemstone jade had a special significance to the Maya. As one Mayan scholar notes, quote, "Jade is often related to rulership and authority, wealth, water, maize, and centrality. Jade embodies ancient Maya conceptions of wind and the breath and the soul," unquote. Now, all those ideas, especially breath and soul and this concept of centrality, are crucial to understanding the lid, believe it or not. The same scholar I just quoted adds elsewhere, quote, "At late classic Palenque, the great ruler Kinish Janab Pakal was buried with jades oriented to the four quarters and the world center. 4 large jade beads were placed at the hands and the feet, framing Pakal as the world axis," unquote. In other words, the hands and feet of the king represented the 4 corners of the world, an important religious and cosmological concept to the Maya. The Mayan 4-pointed symbolism is akin to our own 4 corners of the earth idea. Where to the 4 corners or the 4 points, where do they converge? At the center, the axis mundi, which is Latin for the center of the world, and that's the concept of centrality. So the king's body was arrayed in a very particular posture, his hands, feet pointing to the 4 corners of the earth, so that his body, where his hands and feet converge, would be conceived of as the center of the world, the center of the Mayan universe, as it were. And the king was dressed as the maize god. All of those things taken together are important clues as to how to interpret what we see on the lid. Now let's think together. We've got the king's hand and his feet, which total 4, extended out, positioned in such a way where the king's body was conceived as the joining point for his limbs. So the king's body is in a place of centrality. And for Mayans, this was a 4-pointed array, a 4-pointed symbol that, by virtue of their convergence, would denote that where King Pakal was buried, where his body rested, and where he is typified as sort of a new incarnate maize god, that was where sort of heaven and earth met. It's the axis mundi, the center of the world. Now, this 4-cornered idea in Mayan cosmology was pretty important, and it's actually symbolized over and over again through different images, and 2 most specifically are important. There is a 4-pointed cross stylized as a tree found frequently in Mayan art. You can see some examples here, starting with the one that has a lot of visual clutter, but the cross form itself is visible. This symbol is on the lid of Pakal's sarcophagus. You can see Pakal at the bottom. The 4-pointed tree or cross is emerging from his body, therefore connecting the 4-corner cosmological symbol with the king's body. Again, this is really important to Mayan thinking and the way they conceive the world. It's also significant that this 4-pointed cross tree is adorned with Mayan glyphs for jade. Remember, the king's body was adorned with jade quite heavily. You can see them here in red. These glyphs are not, as von Daniken's books and pictures suggest, about planets and space flight. The carvings on the sarcophagus lid align perfectly with the imagery and the symbolism of the way Pakal's body was buried. Recall again, he was buried with a huge deposit of jade, and jade signified soul and spirit, and again this concept of centrality, where heaven and earth meet, the orientation of the world. Think of heaven and earth being united in one place. The jade again was laid out that way and also in 4 points. As another scholar of Mayan iconography writes, quote, "In Mesoamerican theology, the world tree grew at the locus of creation, all things flowing out from that spot in 4 directions. The tree thus forms part of what Mircea Eliade refers to as the symbolism of the center." Again, the idea of world centrality. The same scholar adds this thought, quote, "The center is first and foremost the point of absolute beginning, where the latent energies of the sacred world first came into being. This source of all creation was often seen as a vertical axis, or axis mundi, which stands at the center of the cosmos and passes through each of the three layers of existence: underworld, terrestrial plane, and of course, sky. Now, all of the items we've talked about, again, are clues as to what the lid actually means. And they sound strange to us. We just don't think in the agrarian terms of Mayan cosmology. But let's summarize and then bring these things together. What do the carvings of Pakal's lid mean? Well, let's remember the king's body that was inside the sarcophagus was dressed as the maize god. The jade on the king's body was arranged in the form of a four-pointed tree or cross that signifies the centrality of Mayan cosmology. In the Mayan view of death and the afterlife, remember this is a tomb, the dead king is sort of planted in his tomb. And from his body, remember the cross, the world tree emerged from the body of the king on the lid. From the king's body, the world tree would sprout, maintaining the cosmos, giving life to the land and of course the cosmos, because the king is in the center. He's the place, his body is the place where heaven and earth meet. To the Mayans, kingship was an eternal office that survived the grave. In agricultural societies like that of the Maya, the cycles of nature were maintained by the king in their belief, in life, and in death. This is why royal burials were oriented to maintain the balance of the cosmos as the central axis point of the universe, the place where heaven and earth converged. As Christensen, another Maya scholar, writes, quote, "The most precious offering was the blood and body of the divine king, who, like the world tree, carried within him the seed of new life. Burial of the king's body within the bowels of a sacred pyramid symbolically returned him to the place of creation, in the hope that proximity to its regenerative power would help his rebirth into godhood. The appearance of the sacred world tree growing from the underworld on the sarcophagus lid of Pakal was the symbolic expression of this concept." In other words, the lid shows us the belief that the king's body is now sustenance for the world tree. That's why the tree grows out of it. And that the cosmos is being maintained by the burial of the king, by his orientation, again, the jade symbolizing spirit and soul. There are a lot of other items on the sarcophagus lid that confirm this and add to it. And you can read about those through the resources found on the webpage corresponding to this episode on the Fringe Pop 321 website. But by way of one more example, we want to take a look at what's actually written on the sarcophagus. The sides of the sarcophagus are inscribed with the names of 10 other people who preceded Pakal as king. Their names are decorated with, not surprisingly, fruit-bearing tree growth, indicating that they also have sprouted into other world trees to maintain the cycles of life. Each king was reborn as a life-giving tree, just like Pakal. They're not headed out into space. Now, what all this means and sort of adds up to is that the carvings on the sarcophagus lid of Pakal have nothing to do with space flight or extraterrestrials. They are well-known motifs throughout the scope of Mayan art. The glyphs and their imagery are agricultural, yet cosmological. They are not extraterrestrial. Their religious significance is well known through the writings of the Maya. In other words, what the Mayans actually tell us in the literature they produced. It really tarnishes Mayan legacy to throw all of that aside and quote-unquote interpret the lid of Pakal in a way that dismisses the Mayans' own beliefs and substitutes a new modern mythology of ancient aliens. Thanks again for watching Fringe Pop 321. Please visit our website, again, for resources that correspond not only to this episode, but all of the episodes we do. They each have their corresponding webpage. If you want to support what we're doing at Fringe Pop 321, go to fp321.com/S, the letter S. And please come back and watch some more, because what you know may not be so.